The glamour felt like a mask of ice against her skin. It was a fragile, shimmering thing, a lie woven from desperation and a stolen lock of hair. Her sister's hair. Serafina's hair. The thought was a familiar pang of guilt, sharp and cold as the wind that sliced through the threadbare wool of her cloak. She pulled the cloak tighter, her knuckles white where she gripped the worn fabric. Below, the horse pulling her rickety cart stumbled, its breath pluming in the frigid air. The northern pass was a treacherous beast of rock and ice, and they were still days from the citadel of the Alpha King. They called her Alara, or rather, they had. Now, she was Serafina. She had to be. Her face, beneath the shimmering illusion, was plain. Her hair was the color of mud, not the spun moonlight of her sister's. Her eyes were a simple, frightened brown, not the startling violet that had broken so many hearts. She was nothing. A ghost wearing the face of a memory. Her stepmother's words still echoed in her mind, sharp as shattered glass. Serafina was meant for greatness. She would have been chosen. You will not let her death be for nothing. You will go in her place. You will wear her face, and you will secure this family's future. Lyra, her stepsister, had smiled then, a cruel, triumphant little smile. Imagine, the little mouse pretending to be a lioness. Do try not to squeak when the Alpha King looks at you, Alara. The humiliation had burned then, and it burned now, a low, constant fire in her belly. But what choice did she have? Since her father's death, they had treated her as less than a servant. She was a burden, a reminder of a previous wife, a plain face in a family that valued beauty above all else. This was her only chance, not for greatness, but for survival. If she could just fool them long enough to be accepted into the pack, even as a lesser member, she might be safe. She might have food. She might be warm. The wind howled, a mournful cry that seemed to claw at the glamour. Alara felt it flicker, a sickening lurt in her stomach, as if her own skin were peeling away. She squeezed her eyes shut, focusing, pushing her meager energy into the spell. It was a cheap trick, taught to her by a traveling hedge witch for a crust of bread, never meant to hold up under such strain. She was so cold. The chill had sunk deep into her bones, a lethargy that made her thoughts slow and clumsy. Hunger was a dull ache she had long grown accustomed to. Worthless, invisible, abused. The words were a litany she had lived with for years. She was just Alara, the shadow cast by her brilliant sister. And now her sister was gone, taken by a winter fever, and Alara was being sent to trade on her corpse. A sudden, violent lurch threw her forward. The horse screamed, a sound of pure terror that was cut brutally short. Alara's head slammed against the wooden side of the cart. The world spun, a vortex of white snow and black rock. The cart tilted, groaning, and then tipped entirely. She was falling. The impact with the snow-covered ground knocked the air from her lungs. She lay there, gasping, pain flaring in her shoulder. Snow melted against her cheek, a shocking, wet cold. The glamour was gone. She could feel it dissipate like smoke, leaving her own plain, terrified face exposed to the elements. The blizzard descended without mercy. The wind was a physical force, shoving at her, burying her. She tried to push herself up, but her arms screamed in protest. Dislocated or broken. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the dull ache of her body. She was going to die here, alone, in the snow, a failed imposter who couldn't even manage the one task given to her. It was almost a relief. She closed her eyes, letting the snow cover her like a blanket. The cold was becoming a strange, soothing numbness. Her shivering began to subside. So this was it. An end to the fear, the hunger, the worthlessness. She thought of Seraphina, of her bright laugh and easy grace. "Forgive me," she whispered, though no sound came out. "I tried." Darkness was pulling at the edges of her vision. But then, another sound cut through the storm's fury, a low growl, deeper and more resonant than the wind. It was the sound of absolute authority, the sound of a predator. Her eyes fluttered open. A shape was resolving itself from the swirling white, massive, dark. A wolf, larger than any she had ever seen, its fur the color of storm clouds. But then the shape shifted, rising, elongating. It was a man. He was colossal, broad-shouldered and wrapped in thick black furs that seemed to drink the meager light. Snow clung to his dark hair and the harsh, beautiful planes of his face. He moved with an impossible grace, each step silent and deliberate in the deep snow. And then he was looking down at her, and she forgot how to breathe. His eyes, they were not normal. They were the color of molten gold, glowing with an inner light that seemed to burn away the gloom of the blizzard. They were ancient, powerful, and they saw everything. They saw her, not the illusion of Seraphina, her, Alara. Fear, primal and overwhelming, seized her. This was him, the Alpha King, Kaelin. She had failed. He had found her, and he would know her deception. He would kill her for it. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of ice. He knelt beside her, the movement fluid and impossibly fast. The sheer scale of him blotted out the sky. He was a mountain of muscle and heat and latent power. The scent of pine and winter storms and something else, something wild and male, rolled off him in waves. His gaze swept over her, taking in her thin cloak, her broken cart, her own terrified face. There was no recognition of Seraphina, no confusion. His expression was a mask of harsh focus. He saw the truth of her, and he did not recoil. His large, gloved hand reached for her. Alara flinched, a pathetic, useless movement. She expected a blow, a blade, an end. Instead, his fingers brushed against the side of her neck, checking for a pulse. The moment his skin touched hers, the world exploded. It was not a sound. It was a feeling, a cataclysm, a shockwave of energy blasted through her, so powerful it was pure agony. It felt like lightning striking every nerve, setting her soul on fire. A scream was torn from her throat, raw and broken. White light blinded her. Her body arched off the ground, a puppet on invisible strings. And through the pain, she felt something else. A connection. A cord of incandescent energy snapping into place between them, so real it felt physical. On her collarbone, just below the hollow of her throat, a searing heat erupted. It was a brand, a burn, a pain so specific and sharp it cut through the chaos. She could feel it forming, a spiraling, intricate mark being burned directly into her flesh by a power beyond her understanding. The light faded, the agonizing energy receded, leaving her trembling and gasping on the snow. Her vision cleared. He was still there, kneeling over her, but everything had changed. His hand was no longer on her neck. He had recoiled as if struck. His golden eyes were wide, blazing now, the molten light within them swirling like a tempest. The harsh mask of his face was shattered, replaced by an expression of raw, profound shock. And something else. Awe. And a terrifying, absolute recognition. He stared at the spot on her collarbone, now hidden by her tunic. He stared at her face, her real face. His lips parted and a single word escaped, a breath of steam in the freezing air. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a claim. You. The word vibrated in the air, in her very bones. It held the weight of centuries, of endless searching. It was a roaring fire against the encroaching frost of death. The scent of him was overwhelming, intoxicating. She felt the steady, powerful beat of his heart against her ear. It felt like coming home to a place she had never been. She was too weak, too confused to fight. She sagged against him, her head falling into the crook of his neck. His skin was warm against her cheek. The deception, the lie about being Serafina, it all seemed like a foolish, distant dream. It didn't matter. He knew. From the first moment, he had looked past the glamour that wasn't even there and had seen her. And he hadn't killed her. "I have you," he murmured, his voice a deep rumble against her ear. "Hold on." And with that, he turned and began to walk, carrying her away from the wreckage of her old life and into the heart of the storm. Alara, lost in a haze of pain, fear, and a terrifying, burgeoning hope, surrendered to the darkness. Waking was a slow, confusing drift. First came the warmth, a deep, penetrating heat that soaked into her bones and chased away the last of the soul-deep chill. Then came the softness. She was lying on something impossibly soft, buried under layers of heavy, rich furs. A fire crackled somewhere nearby, the sound a gentle counterpoint to the howling of the wind outside. The air smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs and that same intoxicating scent of pine in winter that was him. Alara's eyes fluttered open. She was in a vast room, built of dark, heavy timber and stone. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, the flames within leaping and dancing. The bed she was in was huge, a fortress of carved wood and furs. This was not a guest room. This felt like the heart of the keep, the heart of the king. Panic fluttered in her chest. She sat up, ignoring the dull throb in her shoulder, which was now tightly bound. The tunic she wore was not her own. It was a simple, soft linen shirt, far too large for her, that smelled faintly of him. The mark on her collarbone tingled. She pulled the collar of the shirt aside. There, against her pale skin, was a brand. It was an intricate, spiraling knot of lines, like a stylized wolf's head intertwined with a crescent moon, glowing with a faint, silvery light. It was beautiful. And it was terrifying. The door to the room opened, and he entered. Kalen. He was even more imposing indoors without the heavy cloak. He wore simple black trousers and a dark tunic that did little to hide the sheer power of his physique. His molten gold eyes found hers instantly, and the air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with a sudden electric tension. "You are awake," he said. His voice was deep as thunder, yet it held a soft edge that hadn't been there in the storm. Alara flinched back against the headboard, pulling the furs up to her chin like a shield. Where am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You are in my keep. You are safe." He walked toward the bed, and she shrank further away. He stopped a few feet away, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Was it hurt? "I will not harm you." "You know," she blurted out, the words tasting like ash, "you know I'm not her. I'm not Serafina." A strange, soft smile touched his lips. It was a startling sight on his harsh face, like a sunrise breaking over a mountain range. "I have never met anyone named Serafina," he said simply. "I saw only you." Confusion warred with her fear. The glamour. It had failed before he found her. He had never seen the illusion. He had only ever seen her. The thought was so staggering she couldn't process it. All her life she had been invisible. To be seen, truly seen, by him of all people. What did you do to me?" she asked, her hand instinctively going to the mark on her collarbone. It burns." "It is a soul bond," he said, his golden eyes intense. "Our souls have recognized each other. It is a mark of claiming. It means you are my mate." Mate. The word her instincts had screamed at her. She shook her head, a violent, denying motion. "No, that's not possible. I'm no one. An omega, a nothing. You're the Alpha King. It's a mistake." Years of being told she was worthless had built a fortress around her heart. It was impossible to believe that this man, this ancient, powerful being, could be bound to her. It had to be a cruel joke. "There is no mistake," he stated, his voice absolute. "I have waited centuries for you. I would know you in any form, in any life. My soul would know yours." He took a step closer. "What is your name?" She hesitated. Giving her name felt like giving him a piece of her soul. "Alara," she whispered. "Alara," he repeated, and the name on his tongue sounded like a prayer, like a song. "It is a beautiful name." He gestured to a tray of food on a nearby table. "You must eat. You are weak." It was a command, but it was spoken with such underlying tenderness that she found herself nodding. He brought the tray and set it on the bed. There was bread and cheese and a steaming bowl of rich stew. The scent made her stomach clench with a hunger so sharp it was painful. She hadn't eaten a real meal in days. She ate, clumsily at first, her eyes darting up to watch him. He sat in the large chair by the fire, giving her space, but his attention was entirely on her. It was an unnerving feeling, to be the sole focus of such a powerful man. She felt like a small mouse being observed by a patient hawk, a hawk that insisted she was its mate. What would her stepmother and Lyra do when they found out? They had sent her to be Seraphina. They expected a pawn they could control. They would never expect this. They would be furious. The thought sent a fresh wave of fear through her. They would expose her. They would tell everyone she was a fraud. But Kaelin already knew. He didn't care that she wasn't the beautiful, accomplished Seraphina. He had claimed her. Alara. A desperate, terrified hope began to bloom in her chest, a fragile flower in the wasteland of her despair. Could this be real? Could she have a new life here? A life where she wasn't worthless? The next few days passed in a strange, dreamlike haze. Kaelin was a constant, steady presence. He was patient, answering her timid questions about the bond, about his people, the Wolven, and about the keep. He explained that the bond was a sacred, unbreakable connection, and that the mark on her skin was a physical manifestation of it. It tied their life forces together. Her pain was his pain, her joy, his joy. He never pushed her. He never demanded anything. He simply was. He would sit and watch her, his golden eyes filled with a tenderness that made her ache. He brought her books to read, new clothes to wear, and food that was more lavish than anything she had ever imagined. But the fear remained. The keep was full of his people, tall, strong, woven with sharp senses and predatory grace. They looked at her with curiosity and suspicion. Whispers followed her when Kaelin insisted she walk with him through the halls. She was small and plain, and she had no rank. She could feel their doubt. How could this little brown mouse be the mate of their alpha king? Her own self-doubt was a constant poison. Every time he smiled at her, a voice in her head would whisper, "He'll soon realize his mistake. He'll see how worthless you are and cast you aside." One evening, a messenger arrived, breathless and covered in snow. He bore news from the southern territories, from near her old home. Alara was sitting by the fire, reading a book, when the man was shown in. Kaelin stood to receive him. The messenger spoke in a low, urgent tone, but Alara's hearing, sharpened by the fledgling bond, caught the words. "The Lady Lyra of House Volkov sends her greetings. She is concerned. She says the woman you harbor is an impostor. A runaway servant named Alara, posing as her deceased sister Seraphina." Ice flooded Alara's veins. It was happening. Lyra had not wasted a moment. Kaelin's posture did not change. His voice, when he replied, was deadly calm. "I am aware of who she is. Send a message back to the Lady Lyra. Tell her to concern herself with her own affairs, lest I decide to concern myself with them for her." The threat was unmistakable. The messenger paled and bowed low, backing out of the room. Kaelin turned to her. The firelight danced in his golden eyes. He saw the terror on her face. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. His were warm and strong. "Alara," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Look at me. Their words mean nothing here. Their power is an illusion. You are here with me. You are my mate. You are the future queen of this pack. That is the only truth that matters." But his words did little to soothe the frantic beating of her heart. Lyra was not one to be deterred by a threat. Her jealousy was a venomous, living thing. She would not stop. If she could not have Alara exposed and cast out, she would find another way to destroy her. Alara didn't know how right she was. Far to the south, Lyra received the Alpha King's message. Her face twisted into a mask of rage. It was not enough that the worthless Alara had survived. She had somehow ensnared the king himself. "He knows she's a fraud and he doesn't care?" she shrieked, shattering a delicate vase against the wall. "She has bewitched him!" Her ambition and hatred curdled into a new, more dangerous plan. If the Alpha King would not cast Alara aside, then she would give him a reason to. She knew of other powers in the world, darker powers, powers that opposed Kaelin and his reign. The Ember Covenant, a shadowy cult led by a rival Alpha who styled himself a Shadow King. Lyra penned another letter. This one was not sent by a formal messenger. It was tied to the leg of a black-feathered raven and sent flying north, not to Kaelin's keep, but to the jagged, hidden peaks where the shadows gathered. It contained everything. The Alpha King had found his fated mate. The bond was new, and she was weak, an Omega with no training or power of her own. Her name was Alara, and she was the key to breaking the unbreakable Alpha King. Unaware of the new, far deadlier threat she had unleashed, Alara was slowly, tentatively, beginning to hope. Kaelin's unwavering acceptance was a balm on the old wounds of her past. He showed her the sprawling library, the roaring forges, the training grounds where his warriors honed their skills. He introduced her to his beta, a stern but fair wolf named Gregor, and Gregor's mate, Anya, whose initial suspicion slowly warmed into a grudging respect. One afternoon, Kaelin took her to a high balcony overlooking the valley. The snow had stopped, and the world was a pristine blanket of white under a crystal blue sky. "This is all my domain," he said, his voice a low rumble. "And one day, it will be yours, too." She looked up at him, at his strong profile against the sky. "I don't know how to be a queen," she whispered. "I only know how to be invisible." He turned to her, his expression softening. He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of her mousy hair from her face. His touch sent a shiver of warmth through her. "I do not want a queen who knows how to be invisible," he said. "I want Alara. I will teach you the rest." For the first time in her life, she felt a flicker of her own worth, not as a replacement for her sister, not as a political pawn, but as herself. The hope in her chest grew stronger, its roots digging deeper. But shadows were gathering on the horizon, summoned by a jealous heart. And the fragile peace she had just begun to find was about to be shattered. The true test was not in surviving the cold, but in surviving the darkness that was coming for her. The attack came without warning. It was swift, silent, and brutal. Alara was in the library, a vast circular room filled with the scent of old paper and leather. Kaelin had been called away to an urgent council meeting regarding territorial disputes on the eastern border. It was the first time she had been truly alone since her arrival. She was tracing the faded gold leaf on the spine of an ancient tome when a sudden chill swept through the room, extinguishing the candles in a wave of unnatural cold. The fire in the hearth guttered and died, plunging the library into a deep gloom. Fear, cold and immediate, coiled in her stomach. This was not a natural cold. It was dead and cloying, and it smelled of decay and old blood. Shadows detached themselves from the corners of the room. They weren't just absences of light. They were solid, writhing things, coalescing into the forms of men cloaked in black, their faces hidden by deep cowls. On their chests, they bore the sigil of a smoldering ember, the Ember Covenant. Alara scrambled backward, her heart leaping into her throat. She opened her mouth to scream, but one of the figures moved with impossible speed, clapping a hand over her mouth. The hand was freezing cold, and it felt wrong. Dead. Panic seized her. She thrashed, kicking and struggling, but it was like fighting against a statue of iron. Another shadow figure grabbed her arms, twisting them painfully behind her back. A third pressed something cold and metallic against the mark on her collarbone. Silver. The pain was instantaneous and blinding. It was not the fiery, cleansing pain of the bond's formation. This was a deadening, corrosive agony. It felt like acid being poured directly into her soul. The bond between her and Kaylin, that warm, constant presence in the back of her mind, shrieked and recoiled. The silver was poison. It was severing them. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over her. It felt like she was being torn in half. Through the haze of pain, she felt a distant, echoing roar of agony. Kaylin. He felt it too. He felt the silver, the tearing of their bond. Her strength fled. Her body went limp, and the world dissolved into a gray, painful fog. The last thing she was aware of was being lifted and carried, the dead cold of her captors seeping into her skin, and the feeling of the bond stretching thin, 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 like a thread about to snap. She awoke to darkness and the biting chill of stone. Her head throbbed, and a profound, soul-deep ache radiated from her chest. The bond. It was still there, but it was a faint, wavering thread, stretched taut over an impossible distance. It hummed with a constant, agonizing pain. She pushed herself up. She was in a small, circular cell. The walls were rough-hewn rock, slick with moisture. There was no window, no light save for a sliver coming from under a heavy iron door, and it was cold. A deep, penetrating cold that the warmth from Kaylin had only just begun to chase away. Panic began to bubble up, thick and suffocating. She was captured. They had taken her. She scrambled to the door, beating on it with her fists. "Hello? Let me out! Please!" Her only answer was the echoing of her own voice. She was alone, truly alone. The fragile hope she had nurtured was gone, replaced by a soul-crushing despair. She had been a fool to believe she could have a new life. She was Alara the worthless, the burden. And she had dragged the Alpha King into her cursed existence. The pain he must be feeling because of her. It was a guilt worse than any physical torment. She slid down the door, curling into a ball on the freezing floor. She wrapped her arms around herself, but there was no warmth to be found. She felt hollowed out, the vital connection to Kaylin reduced to this agonizing, tenuous filament. Worthless. She had brought this down on him. Lyra had been right about her. She ruined everything she touched. Hours, or maybe days, passed in that cold, dark cell. They gave her no food, only a little water. The pain in the bond was a constant companion, a reminder of her failure. It was a physical manifestation of her despair. At some point, the heavy door groaned open. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the torchlight from the hall. He was not one of the cowled shadow men. He was broad and powerfully built, with a cruel, handsome face and eyes like chips of obsidian. He radiated an aura of dark, predatory power that was a twisted mockery of Kaylin's. "So," the man said, his voice a smooth, dangerous baritone. "This is the great king's weakness. I must admit I am disappointed." He stepped into the cell, his gaze sweeping over her with contempt. "I am Malachor, and you, little Omega, are the key to my victory." This was the Shadow King, the leader of the Ember Covenant, Lyra's new ally. "What do you want?" Alara whispered, her voice trembling. "What I have always wanted," Malachor said, beginning to pace the small cell. "To see Kaylin's reign burn to ash. For centuries he has sat on his throne, a monument to stagnation. He preaches balance. I believe in power, true power, the kind that is taken, not given. He stopped and looked down at her. He is ancient, but the soul bond has made him vulnerable for the first time in centuries. That bond you share, it is a conduit. Your pain is his. Your death, he smiled, a chilling, predatory expression. Your death will shatter him. It will leave his pack leaderless, his throne empty. Fear, cold and absolute, gripped her. He wasn't going to use her as a bargaining chip. He was going to kill her. And her death would cripple Kaelin. But death is so final, Malachor mused, tapping a finger against his chin. And not nearly as painful as what I have planned. I have my sorcerers preparing a ritual. We are not going to sever your bond. We are going to corrupt it. We will pour our own dark magic into it, using you as the gateway. We will turn his greatest strength into a poison that will rot him from the inside out. He will feel every moment of your terror, your despair, amplified 1,000 times. He will be driven mad by it. And I will be there to pick up the pieces of his broken kingdom. The sheer sadism of his plan was breathtaking. It was a fate worse than death, for both of them. Tears streamed down Alara's face. No, she pleaded. Please just kill me. Don't do that to him. Malachor laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Pleading for him? How touching. Your love will be the very instrument of his downfall. He turned and walked to the door. Rest now, little queen. The ritual begins at moonrise. The door slammed shut, plunging her back into darkness. The finality of his words was a physical blow. There was no escape. She was a weapon aimed at the heart of the only person who had ever shown her kindness, who had ever made her feel seen. The despair was absolute. It was a black ocean, and she was drowning in it. She pressed her face against the cold stone floor and sobbed, a storm of grief and self-loathing. I'm sorry, Kaelin, she thought, the words a silent scream into the void. I'm so sorry. She reached for the thin, painful thread of their bond, pouring all of her despair, all of her love, all of her regret into it. It was a final goodbye, a warning. Stay away, she tried to send him. He's using me against you. Don't come. And then, through the pain, through the vast distance, something answered. It was not a voice of words. It was a feeling, a surge of pure, undiluted rage and power that blasted through the bond, so potent it made the air in her cell crackle. It was him. It was Kaelin's fury, a force of nature that dwarfed Malachor's petty cruelty. And within that inferno of rage, a single, clear thought, projected with all the force of his will, slammed into her mind. Hold on. The thought was a lifeline. It was a promise. It was the roar of a lion, letting the world know he was coming for what was his. I am coming. A tiny, impossible spark of hope ignited in the abyss of her despair. She wasn't a weapon. She was an anchor. She was his anchor, and he was coming. She clung to his promise, to the thrum of his rage echoing through their bond. Moonrise was coming, and so was the king. The shadow men came for her as the last vestiges of light vanished from beneath the cell door. They dragged her from the cell, her bare feet scraping on the cold stone, and hauled her up a winding staircase. The silver cuffs on her wrists were a constant corrosive pain, but she barely felt them. Her entire being was focused on that single thread of connection to Kaelin, which now pulsed with a terrifying, imminent power. He was close. They emerged into a vast cavern. The ceiling was lost in darkness, but the floor was a circular platform of obsidian carved with glowing red runes. In the center, Malachor stood with his arms outstretched, flanked by his cackling sorcerers. The air was thick with the stench of blood and dark magic. This was where it would happen. "Ah, the guest of honor arrives," Malachor purred, his obsidian eyes gleaming. "Just in time. The moon is at its zenith. The conduit is open." They chained her to a crude stone altar in the middle of the runic circle. The silver of the chains bit deep, and the pain in her soul bond intensified to an unbearable shriek. She cried out, arching against her bonds. Far away, she felt Kaelin roar in agony. Malachor smiled. "Yes, he feels that. He feels your terror. Now, let us begin." The sorcerers began to chant, their voices a discordant, guttural drone. The red runes on the floor flared, casting a hellish light on the scene. A vortex of sickly green energy began to swirl above the altar, descending toward her. This was it. The corruption. The poison for Kaelin's soul. "No!" she screamed, thrashing against the chains. "Stop!" Suddenly, a sound shattered the night. It was a howl of pure, primal fury, so powerful it shook the very foundations of the mountain. It was a sound of promises being kept, of a reckoning delivered. Boom! The far wall of the cavern exploded inward in a shower of rock and dust. And through the breach, he came. Kaelin was no longer a king. He was a god of wrath. His body was half-shifted, claws extended, fangs bared. His golden eyes were blazing infernos of pure, unrestrained power. He was wreathed in an aura of golden light that warred with the cavern's sickly gloom. Behind him poured his elite guard, the dire wolves, their eyes glowing silver as they fell upon the Ember Covenant with silent, lethal fury. The cavern erupted into chaos. The clash of steel, the snarls of wolves, the screams of the dying. Malachor's sorcerers turned from their ritual, distracted, their concentration broken. Kaelin saw only her. His gaze locked on Alara, chained to the altar, and a guttural roar of pure rage was torn from his throat. He moved, a blur of black fur and golden light, cutting a swath through Malachor's forces. Men were thrown aside like dolls, their bodies broken. He was unstoppable, a force of nature. Malachor stepped forward to intercept him, drawing a wicked, rune-edged blade. "You are a fool to have come, old wolf," he snarled. "You are weakened by the bond. I will kill her before your very eyes." He lunged, not at Kaelin, but at Alara. Time seemed to slow. Alara saw the blade arcing toward her chest. She saw Kaelin, still 10 feet away, his face a mask of horrified rage as he realized he would be too late. This was it. Her death. The shattering of her king. And something inside her broke. It was not despair. It was not fear. It was rage. A pure, incandescent rage that she had never known she possessed. Rage at Malachor, rage at Lyra, rage at her stepmother. Rage at a world that had told her she was worthless, a thing to be used and discarded. Rage at anyone who would dare to harm him. Her mate. The word was not a thought. It was a truth that detonated in the core of her being. Mine. And her power, the hidden, dormant power she never knew she had, exploded from her. It was not a trickle. It was a tidal wave, a supernova of pure, brilliant, silver-white light. It erupted from her body, from the mark on her collarbone, a cleansing fire of life and soul. The silver chains on her wrists and ankles vaporized into dust. The sickly green vortex of dark magic was annihilated. The red runes on the floor were scoured clean, turning back to inert stone. The wave of light slammed into the charging Ember Covenant warriors, and they didn't just die. They dissolved, their shadowy forms unable to exist in the face of such absolute purity. Malachor, his blade inches from her heart, was thrown backward as if struck by a thunderbolt. He landed in a heap 20 feet away, his arms smoking where the light had touched him. The cavern fell silent. The fighting stopped. Direwolves and Covenant members alike stared, stunned, at the source of the light. Alara stood on the altar, unchained. She was wreathed in a column of soft, pulsing starlight. Her plain brown hair seemed to shimmer with silver threads. Her simple brown eyes now glowed with the same inner luminescence as the mark on her skin. The girl who had been invisible was now the brightest thing in the world. She felt powerful. The self-doubt, the fear, the worthlessness, it was all burned away in the fire of her awakening. She was not a victim. She was not a pawn. She turned her glowing eyes to Malachor, who was staggering to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "Impossible," he hissed. "An Omega. You have no power." "You were wrong," she said, and her voice was no longer a timid whisper. It was clear and strong, and it rang with an authority that echoed Kaelin's own. She stepped down from the altar, the light clinging to her like a gown. Kaelin had stopped, his own fury momentarily forgotten in the face of his awe. He looked at her as if seeing the sunrise for the very first time. Malachor snarled and charged her again. "I'll kill you, you little witch!" Alara didn't flinch. She simply raised a hand. "My name," she said, her voice ringing through the cavern, "is Alara." A beam of pure, concentrated light shot from her palm. It struck Malachor square in the chest. He screamed, a high, thin sound of utter agony as the light consumed him, burning away the shadows that held him together. For a moment, he was a silhouette against the brilliance, and then he was gone. Nothing remained but a pile of ash and the faint smell of ozone. The light around Alara slowly faded, sinking back into her, leaving her standing in the sudden gloom. The silence was absolute. Then, one of Kaelin's direwolves let out a soft, odd howl. The battle was over. Alara stood trembling, the adrenaline and power leaving her as quickly as they had come. The exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. Her legs gave out. Before she could fall, he was there. Kaelin caught her, sweeping her into his arms. He held her tight against his chest, his face buried in her hair. He was shaking. "Alara," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe. I have you." She looked up at him. His golden eyes were bright with unshed tears. The last of her fear melted away, replaced by a love so profound it was breathtaking. She reached up, her hand trembling, and touched his face. Her real face. Her real hand. "You came for me," she whispered. "Always," he vowed, his voice raw. "To the ends of the earth, I would always come for you." He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of reverence. It was a kiss of promises kept, of a bond reforged in fire and light. It was the kiss of a king bowing to his queen. In that moment, standing in the ruins of her prison, wrapped in the arms of her mate, Alara was finally, truly home. The journey back to the keep was a stark contrast to the one that had brought her there. She rode with Kaelin on his massive war horse, cradled securely before him, wrapped in his cloak. His arms were a warm, solid cage around her, a constant reassurance that she was safe. The bond between them no longer ached. It was a vibrant, thrumming river of warmth, strength, and a deep, abiding love that flowed both ways. His people, the direwolves, flanked them. They no longer looked at her with suspicion. They looked at her with awe, with reverence. They had seen her power. They had seen her save their king. She was no longer the little brown mouse. She was the Lightbringer, their queen. When they arrived, the entire keep had emptied into the main courtyard. Anya and Gregor stood at the front, their faces etched with worry that melted into profound relief when they saw her, safe in their alpha's arms. Kaelin dismounted, lifting her down as if she were made of spun glass. He did not let her go. He kept one arm securely around her waist and led her to the top of the great stone steps so that all his people could see them. A hush fell over the crowd. Kaelin's voice, when he spoke, boomed with power and pride, reaching every corner of the courtyard. "People of the Northern Pack, the Ember Covenant is broken. Its leader is Ash. The threat is ended." A roar of approval went up from the crowd, a wave of howls and cheers that shook the very stones. Kaelin let it wash over them before raising a hand for silence. "This victory was not won by my strength alone," he continued, his voice softening as he turned his blazing golden eyes on Alara. The entire pack followed his gaze. "We were saved by the light of our new queen." He looked down at her, his expression so full of love it stole her breath. "For centuries I have led you alone. The Great Spirit saw fit to grant me a long life, but it was a lonely one. I waited. Our pack waited. For the one who would complete us. The one whose soul was forged to be the heart of our people." He gently took her hand, raising it for all to see. "She is not the woman you may have heard whispers of. She is not a political alliance. She is my soul, my mate, my other half. She came to us lost and afraid, but she stood in the darkness and became the dawn. She is Alara, my mate, your queen." He was presenting her. Not the illusion of Seraphina, not some idealized noblewoman. Her, Alara, the former outcast, the former nothing. He was telling his people and the world that she was worthy, that she was enough. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in her life, they were tears of joy, of belonging. She felt a nudge in her mind, a soft question from him through the bond. "Are you with me?" She looked out at the sea of faces watching her. Some were still uncertain, but most were filled with hope and awe. She looked up at Kaelin, at the king who had seen her when she was invisible, who had cherished her when she felt worthless. She had a choice: to shrink back into the shadows of her past, or to step into the light he was offering her, the light she had discovered within herself. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. She gently removed her hand from his and faced the crowd alone. They quieted, waiting. "I am Alara," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I have no noble blood. I have no titles. For most of my life, I had nothing. I was told I was weak, worthless. Her eyes found Anya's in the crowd, and she saw a flicker of profound respect in the other woman's gaze. "But I am the mate of your Alpha King," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "This bond, it is my heart. And this pack? You are my people now. I will not hide in his shadow. I will stand beside him. I will use the light within me to protect our home, to protect our family." Then she turned back to Kaylin. She reached up, placing her hand directly over the mark on her own collarbone. The silvery brand flared with light at her touch. Then she moved her hand and placed it flat against the center of his broad chest, right over his heart. "As you have claimed me," she declared, her voice ringing with a power she never knew she had, "I now claim you, Kaylin, my mate, my king, my home." A jolt of energy, pure and white-hot, surged from her hand into him. Kaylin gasped, his eyes flaring into brilliant suns. The bond between them ignited, no longer just a connection, but a perfect, complete circuit. On his chest, beneath her hand, a faint, silvery light began to glow through his tunic. A matching mark, an echo of her own, branding him as hers, just as he had branded her as his. He looked down at the light on his chest, then back at her, his expression one of utter, soul-deep reverence. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "My queen," he murmured, for her ears only. And then, before the entire pack, the Alpha King bowed his head to her. The crowd was silent for a heartbeat, and then they erupted. The direwolves, his council, the pack members, they all went down on one knee, a wave of submission and acceptance that washed away the last of Alara's doubts. She stood there, her hand on her king's heart, looking out at the people who were now her family. She was no longer Alara the worthless, the invisible, the imposter. She was Alara, mate of the Alpha King. She was the light bringer of the North. She was queen, and she was finally, completely seen.